Hi, everybody. If I can have your attention for a minute, we have our next speaker, Joshua Crumbaugh. I'll just do a brief intro. Joshua is one of the world's leading security awareness experts and internationally renowned cybersecurity speaker. He's the developer of the Human Security Assurance Maturity Model, HumanSAMM, and chief hacker at PeopleSec. He's also an expert social engineer who has talked his way into bank vaults, Fortune 500 data centers, corporate offices, restricted areas of casinos, and more. His presentation will review a series of real-life stories about cyber criminals, online predators, as well as lessons learned and what could have been done to avoid these scenarios in the first place. Thank you and welcome, Josh.
I'm the chair, actually. Thank you. All right, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Well, today we're going to talk about cybersecurity. Is anyone excited, or is cybersecurity boring? I don't know if you were saying it's boring or you're excited. All right. Well, I'm going to open up, I like this meme, and I start with this because almost all of attacks are, or compromises, data breaches, identity theft, they start with what's called social engineering. They start with somebody clicking on something they shouldn't click on, or opening an attachment they shouldn't open. And so because over 90% of the attacks start that way, if you simply use your brain and be very careful what you do, that is the best protection that you can possibly have. But I'm going to talk more about that. But real quickly here, let's play a quick video.
I've hacked a lot of things. I've hacked a lot of different banks. In fact, quite a few of them even let us move money. And so a lot of people that have, are on my teams have a bunch of $1 bills framed on their walls because we always steal $1 for each person on the team. All of the studies are showing that over 90% of breaches are tending to start with a phish click, which is an email-based cyber attack. If we're trying to solve a human problem with technical solutions, we're always going to fail.
All right. So I am an ethical hacker. And I've read the comments on YouTube specifically for this CBC segment I did for Marketplace. And I know that you guys think that there's no such thing as an ethical hacker. But there's a few of us out there that work on the good side of things. And so companies, organizations, hospitals hire me to break in and find their security flaws so that I can tell them how to fix them. And in doing so, we do a lot of really fun stuff. I will say I have the best job in the world. I mean, who gets paid to rob banks and casinos and you name it? I one time literally pulled off Ocean's 11 in an afternoon. So, but we didn't take any money. I imagine if we had been trying to move out of that building with, big bags of money, it would have been a lot more difficult. But we really attack things from more of a cyber perspective, and it's all to make people more secure. So today, I'm going to talk to you about a lot of the different lessons learned, how I actually get into places, and how you can be more secure to stop the darker side of, I guess, my industry, the bad hackers. And let's jump in. So why me? Well, I've done a lot of crazy stuff. Like I'm going to tell you a little story a little bit or later about how I talked my way into a bank vault and was literally able to fondle their money and take a selfie with it. But one of the big things that I do is I talk about security awareness, because cybersecurity, it's mainly a human problem, and we've got to build security awareness or better awareness in order to stop having people get their identities stolen, organizations be compromised, and things like that. And so I go around and I do a lot of training on this exact subject. So if this would work. Before I jump in and start telling you some stories, let's go through a couple common misconceptions about cybersecurity. I think one of the biggest ones that I see is security is too difficult to understand. Anyone think cyber is too difficult to understand? Okay, well today we're going to make it far less complex. In fact, if I say anything that you want clarification on, feel free to ask me questions as we go. I want to make sure that we're answering all of your questions. But there's other things, like for example, security is so locked down at my workplace that there's no way a hacker could possibly get in. Anyone think that? Okay, good. Normally I get a couple hands when I ask that question. But that's the correct answer, not raising your hands there. I read a study that was published earlier this year, and it talked about how when people get a malicious email, or an email that they're suspicious of rather, to their personal email address, that there is this percentage of the workforce that will forward that to their corporate email or their business email and open it up at work because they think, I guess, that they won $1 million. Don't do that. There is no such thing as an impenetrable system. The NSA can be hacked, any government can be hacked, and they have budget to actually implement security. So don't do that. And then the last one is security is not my responsibility. The reality is that we live in a world where the front lines of really warfare have completely changed, and now those front lines can be in our living rooms. The criminals can be in our living rooms, maybe listening to you, maybe watching you. And in fact, one of the common things from a personal security standpoint that happens all the time is people install home security systems around their place or around their house. And then they accidentally open them up to the internet. In fact, there is an entire website devoted to nothing but going through and watching webcams of people who installed these things incorrectly and didn't even realize that it's there. And so there was the same, when I was doing Marketplace, I actually had not heard of it when they asked me to come on the show. And I went and watched, and they had an episode about exactly this. And they showed, as the reporter or the journalist was walking up, this actual website, and then looking at one of their viewers, remotely, and just how quickly it can go wrong. So security is a thing that matters to everybody, whether it's personal or at your business. It's all interconnected. Not just that. If you could do everything right, but maybe your kids come in and put their phone that they've installed all kinds of malicious software on accident, I'm sure, but they put it on your network, and now you've got a bad guy in your network. So one of the first things I want to talk about is social engineering. Does anyone know what social engineering is? Okay, I don't see a lot of hands. Well, social engineering is when criminals use human nature against you. Now, let me give you an example of how this might work. So I go down to the coffee shop, I grab 2 coffees, and as you're going into a restricted area, I say, hey, will you hold the door for me? Now, I have 2 coffees in my hands. How many people think you're going to hold the door for me? And now I'm in. And guess what? Now I might go in and pick up a bunch of laptops and hard drives or other things like that, and walk right out the door, and you'll probably even hold the door for me when I walk out of the business with all kinds of stolen equipment, because now my hands are full again. That is a great example of what social engineering is. But here's a quick, I don't know if you saw this, but here's a quick little clip of where I was asked to social engineer, well, in this particular case, it was Rogers on behalf of Marketplace, and so here's a quick little clip about that.
Hello, this is Rogers. Can I get your first and last name, please?
My name is Charles C.
How can I help you?
Yeah, I wanted to add HBO to my account.
It's a 4-digit PIN for security. Can I have it, please?
Yeah, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's not a valid PIN. 1, 2, 3.
It's normally the one I use.
Charles, can I get your postal code, please, and date of birth?
Date of birth is February. Oh, could we set a passcode as long as we're in here?
Oh, yes. Yeah, just give me a moment, okay? Do you have a 4-digit PIN in mind?
Let's make it 0246.
And I need you to select a security question.
We'll go with name of the first pet.
First pet, and the answer would be?
It was Rufus. RUFUS.
So that is social engineering. So why does this work? Well, especially over the phone, and be careful. We sort of, as a people, have to demand better security from our suppliers, but over the phone, I can get very basic, minimal information about you, and even if I don't have it. So like in there when they asked for the postal code, we were off by a digit. We got close, but we were off by a digit. And they still let us in. We didn't have the right passcode, and so they let us set a passcode, and so it's using human nature against you. So why would hackers target you? Well, number one, you are an ideal target. What I mean by that is it's almost guaranteed that if I simply send an email as a hacker, that I'm going to get in wherever I want. In fact, an email phishing email, which is a cyber attack. But I once had an email that we sent, and this was part of a security assessment. And we had realized that this company was going through a merger, and we had gotten into a few people's email accounts. And there was all this stuff going back and forth, and we could tell that there was a lot of concern about what benefits would be once the merger was completed. And so we decided to make an email that says worst of both worlds benefits package, and we put a little bit of malware in the Excel file, or I'm sorry, the Word file, and we sent this out. Well, what ends up happening is that we have to shut down our servers because not only did we have, I think we sent it to 400 people, within 2 hours we were up to something like 1,600 different connections that we had gotten because people were going and sending it to their significant others. They were forwarding it to their home email addresses, opening it up on their personal computers, and we ended up having to shut it down because we were targeting one single corporation, and at the end we had something like 200 home computers and 4 different corporations that were all compromised as a result of this security assessment. And obviously that's not what we want to do because we don't want the police knocking on our door. We're only allowed to hack people that hire us to do it. But I say that because things can go very wrong and you probably won't even know that it happened. So you are the best defense, and it really stands to, or the best thing you can do is just always be alert. And I'll talk more about different things we can do later, but one of the biggest things is, did you know that you can hover in your email over a link and it'll show you where that's actually going? This is very important because you might have a link that says it's going to Google, but if you actually look at it, it's going to some malicious site. And so something as simple as just taking an extra second to see where it's going can be very valuable and prevent some really damaging things from happening. Like, for example, hackers can do a lot of things if you run their malware. They can log your keystrokes. They can use any bit of access that you have. So if you are logged into your bank account, they can log into your bank account. If you're logged into Facebook, they can log into Facebook. And they don't even have to know your password or anything, because once you have malware on your computer, they will just route all of their traffic through your browser. And they could be sitting in Russia on their computer, and they type in whatever bank.com, and now all of a sudden, they're logged into your bank account because it's going through your computer. They can do other things like read any files, look at any pictures on your computer. They can watch your desktop. They can watch through your webcams. They can listen through your microphones. They can access your browsing history. They can get all of your passwords. And they can use your computer to launch other cyber attacks. There have actually been people that got their computers hacked, and then the hackers started launching attacks, and next thing you know, law enforcement shows up knocking on their door because it looks like they're a hacker. So we don't want those sorts of things to happen. In fact, has anyone ever watched that Silicon Valley show? Okay, it's a horribly nerdy startup show, but they had this episode where this guy in there, one of the main characters, he needs extra computing power, and so he basically hacks all of these different smart fridges to get this extra computing power. What's hilarious is that this actually recently happened in the real world, and a bunch of hackers were targeting smart fridges that they hacked in order to launch major nation-state cyber attacks and denial of service attacks and things like that. And so these things actually happen. So I don't know, got that in there a couple times. So let's talk about this. Who wants to hear a story? All right. So I'm going to tell you how I was able to rob a bank over the phone. So whenever somebody sends an email, my computer has to be able to know where to send that email. And so it'll make a basic call and say, hey, where do I send this? And then your email provider will say, send it here. So we took a look at that and realized that this particular bank was using this email provider that had a forum online devoted to nothing but complaining about how bad their email was and how frequently it went out. Now, it doesn't happen that often anymore, but does anyone remember when email was constantly going out? So, well, I do, but I was also in IT. And so this was a really big problem for this company. And we get to thinking, well, maybe we can use this to our advantage to see what we might be able to get them to do. And so I call up, and by the way, I've masked my phone number so it appears as though I'm calling from their provider. So in case you didn't know, caller ID is useless. It cannot be used to identify or authenticate anybody. In fact, back in the day, hackers were able to check your voicemail simply by calling your number from your number, or at least it appeared they spoofed the caller ID, and then it would log them right in and they could check your voicemail. Now that doesn't happen anymore, but caller ID is not a great way to verify people. But your phone will tell you that I'm calling from whoever or wherever. And so I do this and I say, hey, I'm with quality assurance at this email provider, and we've been losing a lot of customers lately because of our poor service. And it looked like you've been having problems with your email. Is that correct? And he says, yes, we have. I've been calling and complaining constantly. And I said, yeah, I know. So what I've done is I've set up a new server here, and all I need you to do is run this little script, and it'll update your settings. And if everything works, then we can go ahead and migrate everything over for your entire organization. And he says, that sounds great. And so I send him, or I give him a link to the script, and he runs it in his antivirus triggers. And I give him some excuse, and he continues going. And I'm like, wow, this guy really should not have kept talking to me, you know. I have him run an executable to update email settings, which is not a thing, by the way. And then on top of that, the antivirus triggers. Now, a quick side note is, and whenever we do these engagements, we have a trusted agent, one person in the organization that knows exactly when we're going to do what we're going to do. So in this organization, this particular bank vice president that I got on the phone was my trusted agent. I did not realize this until we were way too far down the rabbit hole. But he had been told, somebody is going to call up this Friday, and they're going to be pretending to be somebody they're not, to try and get you to do things you shouldn't. And then somebody's going to show up in person the following Monday, and they're going to try and get you to do things you shouldn't. So he had been told this, but yet he fell for this completely. And so now he runs the malware, we go for a while, and I finally get him to run the malware. But at this point, I'm like, you know, the antivirus triggered. He let me run the malware. He's tried a bunch of different things. He even went and logged into a screen sharing app. So like now I have full control of his desktop. I'm like, man, I think I can really get this guy to do something more. And I was like, I think I want to try and schedule an appointment to come in on Monday. Because the easiest way to talk your way into any place is to schedule an appointment ahead of time. It makes it real easy to get in the front door when you get there. So I realize now that we're getting close enough to 5 o'clock that I can probably drag things out until just after 5. and that he's going to be more likely to give me what I want. Who thinks that at Friday afternoon, past 5 o'clock, you'll give somebody anything just to get home? So I know this, and I wait until after 5 o'clock to say, hey, why don't I just come in on Monday, and we can just do the rest of the migration then. We've tested everything. It's working. It looks good. So we'll move all the rest of your users on Monday. How's that sound? And he goes, I'll see you on Monday. And so I walk in on Monday, and I say, hey, I'm here to see XYZ, Mr. Bank Vice President. They have to protect his name because, well, this is an embarrassing story for him anyway. And so we end up getting in, and he says, well, let me take you around and introduce you to a few people. And he starts with the president of the bank. And when I go into the office, and he says, this is the guy from our email company. I told you about him in our email. Just go ahead and log into your computer, get up and walk away, and let him sit down and do his thing. I got to point out, I didn't ask him to tell people to log into their computers. I didn't need that. But it was sort of hilarious. I was like, well, thank you. You're making my job easier now. And so he does that, and next thing you know, I'm going around from computer to computer to computer, and I'm like having flashbacks from when I was in IT. And IT is not the best job in the world, or at least I didn't enjoy it. It gets really monotonous sometimes. But I'm going around to all these different computers, and around, I don't know, maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, this is a fairly small town, it's dead as all get out in the bank, and they come up to me and they say, hey, we're celebrating whoever's birthday. Would you like to come upstairs for some cake and coffee? I said, no, I really gotta, get done with this. I'm just gonna hang out down here and keep working. And they say, okay, well, we're all going upstairs. And so now at this point, I am downstairs with one bank teller and one armed guard. And I'm sitting, I go into this one office, and I'm sitting down and I'm working on it, and then I look over, and I realize the bank vault's open. And I'm like, I can see money. And so at this point, I'm a little bit nervous because there is an armed guard not very far from me, about 50 feet away, and I don't really want to be caught in a bank vault by an armed guard. But I get to thinking, this is way too good of an opportunity to pass up. I'll probably never get another opportunity to do this. And so I walk into the bank vault, where I take a selfie holding a stack of $100 bills. And if that's not bad enough, I leave, and they're none the wiser. No one had a clue that I had been in their bank vault. And so the next day I show up. At this point, they still don't know I've been in their bank vault, but they definitely know my face. Well, the next day I show up as me, the ethical hacker, not whatever personality or character I had gone with that day. And I introduce myself, and so they call this bank vice president downstairs, and he comes down. He gets about halfway down the stairs. He sees me. His face turns white as a ghost. He just turns back around and walks back upstairs. And so we're sitting there about another 5 minutes, and the bank president actually walks out, and he looks at me and he goes, "You bastard." And that's how you rob a bank over the phone. Now, I tell this story, I know it sounds mean, but the reality is if I can do this, bad guys can do this. I've seen a number of times where some very large corporate espionage, to the tune of billions of dollars, I guess attacks have happened as a result of things just like this. And more often than not, that particular employee or that individual will have been being worked on and manipulated for as much as 6 to 12 months prior to any malicious sort of attacks. And so these things can go wrong very quickly. But it's not just corporate enterprise type stuff, it's personal stuff. Has anyone ever seen the emails, "You just won the lottery"? Anyone ever got one of those? Okay, how about, I got one the other day. It was from an ExxonMobil executive saying, "Hey, I've just embezzled all this money. Will you help me get it out of the country?" Anyone got one of those? What's interesting is this one is actually getting much greater results than the whole "I'm a prince" or whatever and I need to get money out, because it adds the criminal element to it. by saying, hey, I just embezzled all this money, and now all of a sudden people believe it more for whatever reason because it's embezzling instead of saying something like you won the lottery. But these things happen every day, and even recently I was over in Europe, and I get a call from my grandma. And she says, hey, I just got a phone call that you were in trouble and you needed me to send you some money. And I'm like, Grandma, thank you for calling me, but that was not me, and please don't wire any money to anyone. And fortunately, she was smart enough and cautious enough to call me, but I've seen this actually happen a bunch of times where money gets sent. Or maybe you're in finance at a place and all of a sudden you get a message from the CFO saying, hey, wire $50,000 today, I need it, this is urgent, and then people wire money. I saw one, the biggest one I ever saw with the wire one was $250,000. But just $250,000 gone like that. So here's a couple common questions. So what do I do if I accidentally clicked on something? Has anyone ever accidentally clicked on something that maybe they shouldn't have? I'll admit it, I did the other day. I get all these Google alerts, and I've set them up, and I have one for my name. And so anytime my name shows up on the internet in Google, I get an email. And so there's this one, and it's in Chinese, but it has my name, and it says something like how to rob a bank over the phone, which I've done, that's one of my talks. And I click on it because I think, well, I want to know what this is. And fortunately, I had a malware blocker on my computer, and it blocks the site, and it says, this is a malicious site. And I'm like, oh, wow, the Chinese just got me to click on something. I'm not supposed to fall for phishing attacks, but the reality is any one of us can actually have that happen. So if you click on something, if it's your work computer, you need to let IT know immediately. But if it's your personal computer, you're going to want to make sure that you don't have anything on there. So make sure your antivirus is updated, run it. And if you start having any odd things happen on your computer, it's probably time to take it into a tech person to have that malware removed. So the next thing is, how do I create a strong password? And I'll talk more about this later, but is anyone sick of 8 characters, upper, lowercase, special character? Does that get old? So I will tell you, that's about the dumbest advice that could be given to anyone in terms of how to select a password. We've basically created a system where we create passwords that are impossible for a human to remember and easy for a computer to guess. And so we need to instead do passphrases. So instead you could say, I love hockey, and with spaces and everything, and you make it a phrase or a sentence instead. And it's easier to remember and much more secure, because when it comes to secure passwords, it's all about the length. So the longer you can make them, the better. I will tell you, complexity does not really matter much at all. And anyone who tells you otherwise, they don't understand entropy. So that's how you do that. But there's other things. What happens if you lose your laptop? Does anyone know what they would do if they lost their laptop? Do you have encryption? What? What was that? Have a stroke. So these are things we got to think about. Because if I lose my laptop, I can tell you I can remote wipe it. It's all encrypted. So you're not going to be able to figure out my password. And even if you did, I can remote wipe, so I'm not going to lose any data. Most people don't even think about these things until after they've lost their laptop, and now there's nothing they can do. And if you've got an easy password, a password that's been compromised before, and almost everyone's passwords have been compromised. So if you're reusing the same one from years ago, chances are it is in a database somewhere. These data breaches, one of the problems is that people tend to not change their passwords. And so let's say maybe you have a LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn had a breach, I don't know, but a couple years back. And so one of the things I can do is just go in and say, hey, what passwords does this person use? And then I try and go log into your accounts, and chances are it gets me in, because people use passwords in a bunch of different places. So stuff like that. What happens if you lose your cell phone? It's the same thing. Fortunately, with Apple, they make it real easy to do remote wipes and locate and things like that. But these are things that need to be thought of. And then another one is just, how do I send sensitive information securely? I quite literally, I had a client of mine, they said, hey, we need this XYZ sensitive information. Can you email it to us? And I'm like, I'm not emailing you all of this sensitive information. You got to provide me with a secure way to send it to you. But most people don't think about that, and they would email that, and then it's stored insecurely and can be easily compromised. So now let's talk a little bit about social media. Because anyone use social media? So I will say, I was impressed when I did the whole CBC thing. One of the things that they had me do, it didn't end up making the episode, so it ended up being cut. But they had me go and do recon, or what's called open source intelligence. And this is basically going out and scouring the internet, scouring social media for any information that I can find out about you. And you'd be amazed at what type of stuff you can get about people. But before I jump into that, I was impressed at just the Canadians in general not oversharing nearly as much as the typical American overshares. And the example I like of oversharing is, well, what's your password? Often it'll be a dog's name, a kid's name, maybe a birth date. And so now I can go on your social media feed, find a picture of your dog. It's probably has the dog's name tagged in there. And then maybe you don't post your birthday on social media, but you probably have a picture of a cake from one day where you say where you're out with your friends celebrating your birthday. And so now I found your birthday, or maybe your anniversary, and things like that. And so the problem is that people literally post their passwords online every single day. And they don't think about it because their password might be Rufus123 or something like that. But then they, say, hey, check out my cute fluffy dog Rufus online. And it's not hard to get the rest of the data. So things like that. Another one, there have been cases where criminals have staked out and actually robbed people based on social media. So you go online and you're posting all these pictures of your great vacation saying, hey, I'm not home. And then you get home and none of your stuff is home when you get back. So it's oversharing on social media is a very, very big problem. But there's other stuff. This is one that I actually saw online, and it was hilarious. This person, and there's a number of them, but one, it's where somebody says, hey, check out my new credit card. I just got my first credit card, and they put a picture. And then the person replies, or a bunch of people reply, and they say, well, what's the 3-digit number on the back? And the person's like, I don't know why you guys care about this number, but it's one, whatever. Another one I saw just yesterday, hilarious. So I don't know what the Canadian equivalent is, but in the United States, we have social security numbers, which we use for credit, getting loans, things like that. And these numbers you don't really want other people to get because that's how your identity gets stolen. And so I saw this post on LinkedIn, and it says, if you made $1 for every number, what was it? If your salary was your social security number, how much money would you make? And all these people start posting how much money they would make in there. And so oversharing, it's a really, really big problem. But it's other things. It can be used to learn about somebody's schedule. Let's say maybe you have a high level of access at an organization or some governmental agency or something like that I want to gain access to. Well, if I can learn enough about you on social media, I can probably bump into you on the street. And I have this nifty little device. It is a RFID card reader with a big battery that I've just put into one of those little folio cases or folio things. And so I just carry this around. And now when I know where to bump into you, when you're just getting out of work, I can actually come in and read your card without you ever knowing. It could be something as little as that. And we bumped into each other. You didn't think anything of it. But now I have the keys to the kingdom. I can now access your organization. And so, in fact, in your bags, they had a RFID card blocker that helps prevent things like this from being able to happen so that somebody can't read these things. But most people aren't using them, and so I've done things like hang out in a bathroom until some executive goes to wash their hands. And then I just walk up right next to them and I go wash my hands, and all the meanwhile I'm reading their stuff. So a lot of different things can happen from oversharing and not being careful enough. But there's other ones. There was a CFO that got fired because he had a bad day at work and went online complaining about the organization. So, excuse me, my throat's getting dry here. But oversharing can be a problem. I've also, we once were doing a phishing attack or a test against a company. And what we ended up doing was, this one was very targeted. So as opposed to sending it to a bunch of people, we sent it to one person. And so we went online and we looked at all of their different employees that we could find in their Facebook. And our goal was to find something that was highly controversial on somebody and then send an email pretending to be from HR saying, hey, we found this. And so we found an employee, a female employee, and she had made a bunch of racist comments online. And so we took a couple screenshots of them and sent an email, and we said, hey, we found this. Here is a document outlining our acceptable use. Please open it. And basically they opened it, and we were able to get malware on their computer. And so the other thing is that, like, internet, it's a public record. It's the permanent record. You go online and you post pictures of you drunk as all get out. That might affect you later on in life. Or at least in the United States, I still live in a place where marijuana is illegal. And so I saw somebody one time, occasionally we'll get hired to do social media investigations for companies that they're hiring executives or something like this. And it had been taken down and the person thought it was gone, but we were able to find pictures that they had posted of them smoking marijuana, and we reported, and they ended up not getting the job as a result. I don't think it should be such a big deal, but the reality is that this is a thing. So, anyone ever use public Wi-Fi? Okay, so I have this fun little trick that I'll do once in a while. If I get bored at a Starbucks, I'll jump on their open Wi-Fi, and the key word here is open. And then I'll take a picture from the back of Starbucks and of everyone sitting on their computers, and then I will just simply swap out every picture on the internet with the picture of everyone sitting on their computers. And it's funny because within just a few minutes, everyone starts looking over their shoulder. But I do it, and I make the picture, typically I'll swap it out after a few minutes, and I'll put something in there saying, hey, be careful, you're on open Wi-Fi. It's not safe to use. But open Wi-Fi is a great way to get your credit card information stolen or things like that. And so in general, don't do anything sensitive if you're on a untrusted internet connection like a Starbucks internet connection, or maybe a Tim Hortons internet connection or something like that, because the hackers, they could potentially route all of your traffic through their computer and you'll never know it. And now, because it's going through your computer, if you're online shopping and you just typed in maybe a credit card number, all of a sudden that's stolen, and now you're probably going to have some charges that you're not planning on. Yes? Yes, it is. So the question was, is it safe to assume that every time you hear the word computer, that smartphone could be replaced with that? Absolutely. They're all computing devices, so the same rules basically apply to everything. Now, there are these things to help you stay safe if you're using public internet. I travel a lot. I have to constantly use public internet. So they have a VPN, or virtual private network. There are tools online that are very simple. I use one called IPVanish. Not that that's the best one or whatever, but I use one called IPVanish. And what it does is it encrypts all of my traffic specifically to my computer. So now, if a bad guy's listening in and sniffing that traffic, it's encrypted. They're not going to be able to get my passwords. They're not going to be able to get my credit card number or any other sensitive information. There's a bunch of different VPNs out there that are very affordable and incredibly simple to use. It's literally just click here, download the app, click connect, and all of a sudden you're a million times more secure when you're using those types of connections. I guess I've already covered this. I do love this little comic here. I don't get it. I've got like 1 million emails. It's free money. And I had to bleep out a little bit there. Somewhere in Nigeria. But the reality is this literally happens every day. And fraud is a massive, massive problem. I was in, last year, I was in Hawaii speaking at a conference. And this was my only day to go to the beach. And so I probably should have gone to the beach, but I get a phone call right as I'm about to leave my room. And they say, hello, this is Microsoft Tech Support. Anyone ever got one of those calls? Okay. Microsoft does have tech support, but I promise they don't call you. And they're not nearly that great at customer service. But they say, hey, we detected that you have malware on your computer. And I said, oh, really? And so now I spend the next 3 hours on the phone with this guy until I get cussed out in 2 different languages. First he cussed me out in English, and then I frustrated him so badly he cussed me out in his native tongue as well. But as a result, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but we were able to then get him to give up his information, his location, and give us some other information that we were able to turn over to law enforcement. And then this particular con artist actually ended up getting arrested. In fact, the CBC had asked me, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but it's probably a bad idea since it's technically illegal. But one of the things they wanted to do is they said, hey, why don't we go and hack a call center? And I was like, yeah, I've sort of wanted, or not like a fraudulent call center, one of these con artist shops. And by the way, organized crime is very organized. They literally have leaderboards in there. They have quotas that you have to make. It's literally like working in a legitimate call center. And so they were saying that one of their ideas is, well, why don't we take it and shut down their entire network, every system in it? And they were like, yes, let's do that. I want to be outside recording so we can see the chaos. But these things are a big business to the tunes of billions of dollars. So the general rule of thumb is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So when it comes, let's talk about passwords. I've already hit on it a little bit, but size matters. The length of the password is incredibly important. Also, I love this meme. I changed all my passwords to incorrect, so whenever I forget it, it will tell me your password's incorrect. So, anyone write down their passwords? So, I've learned that there's not an organization that I can, if I can get physical access to the place, that it never takes me more than 10 computers. And all I do is I go up and I flip up the keyboard and I look underneath it. And within 10 computers, I always find a password. Don't write down your passwords. And if you do, store it like in your wallet or someplace more secure than underneath your keyboard. In fact, even at a lot of places, the security code on the alarm system. I generally am not very concerned about it because 9 times out of 10, I can find that security code written down right next to the alarm plate. So the next thing, anyone ever share passwords with people? Share accounts? Okay, that's good. I'm glad I don't see a lot of hands. But I will say in the real world, the first thing I do when I get into somebody's email is I search password. And guess what? I find all kinds of passwords. In fact, I've found the combinations to bank vaults in email just being randomly emailed around. All kinds of passwords to be able to like wire money. One time I saw all of the credentials for the payroll system that were being emailed around. And here's the scary thing about a payroll system is that you can go in there, change all the routing information. Chances are no one catches it until, I don't know, all of your employees missed their paycheck that day and the money's already gone. So these things happen. So don't share passwords. I like to say sharing passwords is like sharing needles. It might save you some money, but it's pretty stupid. So, wow, tough crowd here today. Anyone know what multi-factor is? Okay, so for those of you who don't know what multi-factor is, it is called multi-factor authentication. It is most typically where you get a text message with a little code when you go to log in. Passwords aren't good enough, so enable that on any sensitive systems or even your social media, because any system you don't want somebody in, don't plan on your password being enough. And so enable this multi-factor any possible time you can. Now, there's ways that people can get around that, like, for example, calling up Rogers and saying, hey, can I swap out my PIN? And then all of a sudden, all your calls and text messages and things like that come over to me. But this makes it more difficult on the hackers, and it's one more step that they have to go through to compromise your accounts. So, in general, enable this on everything you can. So, the next thing is, a lot of attacks that hackers will send aren't necessarily trying to put malware on your computer. Sometimes they're trying to steal your credit card information. Other times they're trying to steal information that could be used to compromise your identity. Other times they're just trying to steal your password. And so you might click on a link, and it takes you to a site that looks just like a Facebook login or just like a bank login. And when you get there, when you get there and you type in your password, that is automatically being fed back to the hacker's malicious server, and they see everything. And then 9 times out of 10, it's going to tell you it failed to log in, because it's not your actual bank, and you might realize this or you might not, but now your credentials are compromised. So when this happens, you need to change your password everywhere. I had somebody what was it, earlier this week or late last week, they call me and they say, hey, I've been getting a bunch of messages that somebody's trying to log into my Facebook account. What do I do? Anyone ever had that happen? Okay, one person. So I said, well, you need to change your password, because clearly somebody has compromised your password now. So the easiest thing you can do is simply change your password. And if it doesn't stop, that means your computer's compromised. But let's just start with changing your password. And so when you've accidentally had your password compromised, however it happened, you need to change it. So there is a site out there I recommend everyone sign up for. It is called Have I Been Pwned? PWND, I think. It might be ED. Google it. Don't just type in .com. But it's Have I Been Pwned? And pwn is the hacker phrase for compromised. And what it'll do, send you an email alert if your information is involved in any data breaches. So if your password on, let's say, LinkedIn is compromised, it'll tell you, and now you know to go out there and change your password anywhere you've used that particular password. So make sure to do that for anything sensitive. Don't reuse passwords. Does anyone know about secure password managers? Anyone use any? So I use this technology, and there's a lot of different ones out there. I use one called LastPass. And basically what it does is it allows me to type in one really big, long, complex password to log into this program, and then it encrypts and stores all my passwords. And so when I get to the site, it just automatically populates them, and I can go ahead and log in. So there are tools out there for this, but don't use your browser's built-in password storage unless you're on a Mac. It's the only one that has a secure one. Things like Chrome are not stored encrypted. And so now when I get in, let's say, because I do more of the corporate side of things, but one of the funny things I've seen happen is people tend to store their passwords in Chrome. Anyone ever store their passwords in Chrome? Okay, we got a few. And here's what happens. So now I can pull all of your passwords in plain text and see exactly what they are. But what's funny about Chrome, and tends to be very embarrassing for some people about Chrome, is that Chrome will ask you to log in. And then it'll automatically sync your passwords from one Chrome to another. And so now you log in with your personal Google account on your work machine, and anything personal that you have saved in there, no matter what it is or how embarrassing it might be, is now on your work computer. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and dumped credentials and found credentials for stuff that you just wouldn't want on your work computer. We'll just leave it at that. So don't use the built-in browser storage unless you're on a Mac using Safari. It's the only one that is actually secure. Otherwise, get a third-party password manager. It'll help a lot. And you can simply remember one password and have highly complex, very long passwords for everything else. And if it's a work computer and you've clicked on something or you think your password's compromised, you need to let information technology or IT know immediately, because they can go through and change some stuff. So I already talked about not writing passwords down. What about giving out passwords? If the IT help desk at your place of work called and said, hey, I need your password, I'm doing some updates, what do you tell them? What? Pound sand, okay. Yes. But all too often, people do it. In fact, in most networks, there are accounts that can log into any computer. So your account might only log into yours, but the IT people, they have accounts that'll get you into anything and everything. And so I'm doing this test against this multinational law firm, and I call up at the very beginning, and I'm just trying to get a little bit of information over the phone. But I say, hey, I'm trying to run this application, but it keeps getting blocked by this whatever. And it was being blocked by this, whatever, it's technical, I won't go there. But I said it keeps getting blocked and the computer won't let me run it. And he says, well, just use my credentials. And I said, okay, well, what are your credentials? And he gives me his credentials. And these are like keys to the kingdom, can log into anything in the entire network. And this is within like 15 minutes of starting the assessment, and it's already game over. What was funny, though, is his password was password 1. Now, in his defense, he changed the A to an @ sign, so it's secure, right? So don't use password 1. Also, typically not as common with personal accounts, unless except for like in banking, where some banks make you change your password on a very regular basis. So right now, in enterprises in the Northern Hemisphere at least, or all of North America, I can tell you that the most popular password is either fall 2019 or winter 19, depending on when they last set their password. You laugh, but I can get into almost any network this way. I go onto LinkedIn and I say, hey, who works at this place? And it gives me a nice list of everyone that works there. And then I go on Google and I say, hey, and I basically just search for any email address that ends in whatever this particular one is. And then I find at least one email address every single time. And now I know how they make the email addresses, whether it's first initial last name or first name dot last name. And I got a list of all your employees, and so I just go and I create a list of emails off of it. And then I go to one of your login portals, like your webmail or something like that, and I just guess fall 2019 against every single different email address. And almost every time I'm able to get into a network and compromise systems. We've had total compromises as a result of that, because even IT doesn't necessarily use good passwords. So never share passwords, and then if you can possibly avoid it, don't share accounts, especially to things that are sensitive. So if you share some very sensitive account, let's say their banking credentials, and let's say it's within a work or whatever, or even just at home, one of the problems is that if it gets compromised, you don't know where it started at. And this is especially important in the enterprise, but it's important at home too, is that you don't want to share account access because it removes the ability to track what happened, because there's too many people involved, or at least it makes it more difficult to track what happened. So the next thing is, and I know this is going to be one of the most boring things, so I'll try and get through it quick, But updates. Anyone get sick of everything constantly trying to update? I do too, by the way. It gets old trying to keep things updated. But did you know that the #1 reason for updates is to patch security flaws? They're rarely giving you new features. Almost all of the time, it is simply to patch security flaws. Yes?
Can I ask a question about passwords?
Yes.
Sorry. You mentioned at the start to use a phrase rather than the capital.
Yes.
As a symbol. Oftentimes they really limit what you can use. There's no spaces. You have to use a number. You have to use. So I mean, how would you go about changing your character?
So it is a problem there. Okay, so the question was, oftentimes the different organizations, different places will limit how strong you can make your password. And this is a problem. I've had sites where I went to set my password say, your password's too long. I have had them say, you can't use that special character. I've had them say, you can't do whatever. And it's a problem. We should be able to have very strong, complex passwords for sure. And this is where I say, part of the responsibility for security is on the consumer themselves. So if your vendors don't care about security as much as you care about security, it might be time to find a new bank or a new whatever because security is important and you certainly don't want your online bank accounts compromised. But there is not a good answer. It's a problem for sure. I tend to shame them on Twitter whenever I run into it. I take a screenshot and I just say shame. Things like that can help a lot as well. And I've actually had them get fixed as a result of tweets before. So it's often not a difficult thing for them to change. So back to updates. What happens is there's a lot of hackers out there that are looking for bugs in your software. And these bugs, all they really do is make it to where I can run code, run malware remotely on your system because you have an outdated computer. And so there's the really famous one that I think most people heard about where there were these NSA exploits that all the bad guys got a hold of. Did anyone hear about the NHS ransomware attack over in the United Kingdom? So basically, most governments have different cyber weapons, and they can use these things to go and hack remotely. Well, recently, a number of these different governments' weapons and tools have been leaked. The NSA's, the CIA's, Russia's, I think even some of China's recently. And so now all the bad guys, they'll go and they will start using this known vulnerability or this known weakness within the tools and the applications that you're using to compromise your system. So for example, we recently found a botnet on a bunch of Android devices where there were close to 500,000 different Android devices online that were completely wide open, without a username and password, and because the hackers had exploited a weakness and then used this to open up what's called a debugging mode. And so without a username or password, you could get in there, do things like, I don't know, watch the webcam, listen to the mic, things like that. And these 500,000 people didn't even have a clue that their devices were compromised. So update your stuff as soon as it comes out, unless you're traveling internationally. And in general, update on a trusted internet connection. But I will say, if you travel internationally, do not update anything. It even happened to me when I got into Canada. My phone, that was fully updated when I took off the second I landed here, said, you have updates. And so a lot of times, what will happen, and China's really bad about this, is that they will push fake updates that have malware when you're traveling internationally. It's government, it's always government stuff, or almost always government, but you don't want the Chinese government having your phone or compromising your phone or whatever. So update.
I have a question.
Yes?
How easy is it to hack things like Alexa and Google Home, that kind of thing?
So Alexa and Google Home are actually fairly secure devices. By default, they're only exist internally on your network. They are just based on the Android operating system, so it's really no difference in difficulty between hacking your cell phone or hacking an Alexa or something like that. But Amazon and Google tend to do very well at security. So in terms of bad guys listening in, they're probably not. But I will say the advertisers are definitely listening in 24/7. In fact, there's this new known thing where people are finding out that their spouses or significant others are cheating on them because they start getting ads online that say, is your significant other cheating on you? Because Google and the phone and all these different places, they're using data like geolocation. All of a sudden, these two phones that aren't normally next to each other are next to each other in a residential area in the middle of the day, and they start serving up ads. I'm sure everyone's heard the stories of you're talking about some random thing, and then minutes later, ads for that random thing start showing up on your computer. So be careful. You're sacrificing privacy. I wouldn't worry a whole lot about bad guys hacking them, but I would worry about your privacy. And by the way, I do not have any of those devices in my own home because I don't trust them. So anyway, I'm going to get off of updates, but update everything. The next thing is, if you can, I know encryption tends to seem like really complex, but if you can, use encryption on stuff. Most often, it's as simple as checking a box somewhere on your device that says, hey, I want to encrypt it. And a lot of things are coming encrypted by default now, like iPhones, for example. They're automatically encrypted so that you don't have to do anything and that people can't necessarily get at your data. I've already talked about that. So does everyone know the difference between HTTP and HTTPS in the browser? Okay, yes?
Yeah, I just want to ask a question about encryption for I know there's software encryption programs and some have come and gone, like TrueCrypt went away, kind of thing like that. But for hardware encryption, like those external drives that have passcode, like you have to punch in a code, are any of them actually, is there any that you would recommend? Because I've bought some for what I do, and they default to a default code at times after it failed. Is there any that are actually all right to use, just strictly hardware encryption?
I use Aegis Secure Key, AEGIS.
Okay. It's
called Secure Key. And it has a keypad on the USB drive. And I have to type in my code to open it up and decrypt it. And the second I pull it out, it re-encrypts. And if you were to get a hold of it and try and figure out my code, if you type in the wrong code 10 times, it wipes all of the data off the device. And I may have lost my data, but no one got access to it. So he was asking about self-encrypting thumb drives. I think they're great. I'm surprised they're not more popular because they are a very effective way of carrying around sensitive information without having to worry about accidentally dropping a USB drive. Another thing about USB drives, I'll tell you, is that dropping USB drives is a guaranteed way to get malware on almost anyone's computer. I like to go outside into parking lots, and I'll drop a bunch of USB drives. And they all, I went to one of these marketing promotional material websites, and I had all these little USB drives printed up that say confidential in big red letters on the side of it. And then I'll drop them around the HR department or out in the parking lot, and I put a document on there. It'll typically be 2020 layoff schedule or 2019 executive compensation plan. And you'd be amazed. People will plug these things in and run these files. In fact, we had one time where we weren't anticipating some of the security. And so we drop them and we get nothing. And then 2 days later, all of a sudden this, we call it a shell, but our malware pops in and we have a connection. And I'm like, how did that happen? And so we tracked down the user and we were just like, I got to know, this is days old. What happened? And he said, oh man, it took me 2 days to figure out how to get around security to run that thing. So be careful. It's probably not stuff, and people will plug these things in all the time. I know it's not about encryption, but be careful. If you find a thumb drive on the ground, that could very well be from a hacker. This is a very long, tried, and proven tactic to get into places. Anyway, back to HTTP versus HTTPS. I do want to, just in case anyone doesn't know the difference, in your browser, there will normally be a little lock up in the top left-hand or right-hand corner. But when you're going to websites, HTTP is insecure. HTTPS, S stands for secure. Don't ever enter your credit card information on a site that doesn't have the lock in the corner. Because that's not secure. That means that all of your sensitive information, whether password, credit card, whatever, is being transferred in plain text. You don't want it transferred in plain text. For one reason, if you're on an open net, Wi-Fi or something like that, then they can just intercept it. But on top of that, did you know that just about every major government in the world is now actively intercepting just about every bit of traffic on the internet? And they're storing all of it, because even if they can't decrypt the traffic right now, they can decrypt it. They know that they're going to be able to decrypt it within just a few years. And so if anything that you've transferred in plain text is now wide open and out there. So be careful. The next thing is smart devices. I think we've talked about them a little bit, but you've got to be very careful. So the number one rule with connected devices. Anyone have like a smart fridge in their house? Alexa, Nest doorbell? Okay, so we have a little bit of it here, but you've got to be really careful with these devices, because there's a lot of companies out there that don't care about security. And so they will do things like leave default credentials on stuff. Now, default credentials are a really big deal. I once had a company, it was a big New York City fashion retailer. They hire us to conduct this assessment, and they had just put this tool to allow users to reset their passwords on the internet. Literally the day we started the assessment, or the day before, they had put this up. And they're trying it out. They hadn't fully deployed it yet. But they leave default credentials on it, and they put it out on the internet. And so within seconds, or well, really minutes of starting the test, we find this. And not only did it have default credentials, but they were self-populating, so I didn't even have to go and Google and find out what they were. I just clicked log in. And I get logged in. And the first thing it says is, would you like to sync your credentials with an external database? And I said, yes, I would. And now all of a sudden, it dumps all of the usernames and passwords for this entire retailer, all of their employees, out to my database out on Amazon or in the Amazon cloud. And I had everybody's passwords just like that because of default credentials. But it can also mean things like having somebody spy on you when you're sitting in your home because you have a surveillance system in there. That is one of the biggest problems with people installing surveillance systems, is that they don't change the password, or sometimes when you install it, it won't even ask you to change the password, and it won't even tell you that there's an issue. And then it'll automatically pop an connection out on the internet, or opening this up to the internet, and you won't have a clue because it's all happened behind the scenes. So that brings me to the number one rule of Internet of Things. Make sure to buy from reliable vendors. There are consumer advocacy groups out there that do like consumer reports. They actually will talk about the security of different things, but buy from reputable vendors is the number one thing. Don't buy some cheap Chinese or knockoff on Amazon and expect that they're going to care about your security. But other than that, I mean, just in general, be careful and pay attention during setup. I know it's easy when you go and install things to just click next, 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 done, okay. But a lot of those things you should probably read because they might have to do with security. I already talked about that. So let's talk a little bit more about social engineering. So there's a number of different types of social engineering attacks. One is phishing. I've talked about that. Another one we call vishing or voice phishing. This is when you just call up over the phone. And it's amazingly easy to get people to give out information on the phone. And a lot of times, it's going to be information that seems harmless to you. Like, why does this information matter? Like, for example, who's your pest control service? That doesn't seem like anything that would be harmful, right? Until I show up pretending to be your pest control guy, and I start walking through the place, or even gain access to your house as a result. So be, especially over the phone, it's impossible to get caught, and you can pretend to be anyone. And so you've got to be careful when you get phone calls. And one of the general rules of thumb about anything social engineering is, does it sound too good to be true? If it does, it's probably a red flag. Other red flags. Have you ever met somebody and just hit it off, and immediately you felt like they were your new best friend, or you just knew they were going to be your new best friend? No one? No one? Wow, I've had that happen before. But the reason I bring that up is because if somebody is trying to social engineer you or con you over the phone, when you're talking to them, they will feel like they're your best friend, because they will do things to try and remind you of yourself in them. And they'll do things to build camaraderie and even create this us against the world sort of scenario that makes you like me or them more. And so when you have these things happen, it's a red flag. Other red flags. Anyone ever been tempted to ignore security protocol because you really wanted to, I don't know, click on a link or do whatever? Has anyone ever ignored basic security? So one of the ways we tested, we've actually done some security testing for the NHL. And one of the ways I have gotten into like the back quadrant or the game operations center or even the locker rooms before is I will have a coworker pretend to be in a relationship with me. And when we get to security, we will get into a fake argument. And you know what happens? No one wants to get in the middle of a couple arguing. And so they just ignore you completely and let you walk right on through. It was actually, so I'm a Red Wings fan. Don't hold that against me. But this was, one of the ones was a Red Wings game. And not only were we able to get in, but we were able to hack the Jumbotron. And I ended up watching the game standing next to the general manager in the game operations center. And no one asked me who I was and why I was there the entire time, just because I walked in and acted like I was supposed to be there. And I had a cover story. I told him, hey, you know, we knew this was a really big game and an important one, and so we wanted to just have some extra staff on hand in case you had any issues. Oh, cool, thank you. Here, hang out with us for a little while. These are the types of different things that can happen with social engineering. But let me tell you about something that I call the denial of thinking attack, and then we'll wrap up and open it up to questions here. So I have this thing I coined as a denial of thinking attack, but it's a great reminder as to some of the things that you should pay attention to help you identify these types of attacks. So that same multinational law firm I told you about where the guy gives me his password over the phone, well, it was game over. We had 8 days for this assessment, and we only needed 8 minutes. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do the rest of this time? And they wanted us to test whether or not we could gain physical access to their data center. And so I go in, and since we have full access to everything, we just log into a few people's email accounts, send a couple emails, and put it on the receptionist's calendar that I'm coming, and then send an email from the CFO saying, hey, let this person in when they get here. And I had a fake business card and ID and everything like that to match the identity. And so I show up, and she says, we've been expecting you. Here's your credentials. Let me take you to the data center. And she walks me all the way there and lets me in. And I'm like, man, that went perfectly according to plan. Except it didn't, because they had this tiny little security, like low-budget security mechanism that I wasn't expecting and I didn't see. It was a pinhole camera on the ceiling that took a picture of everyone that entered their data center and emailed it to all of IT. I had not planned on that. So this guy comes in and he says, who are you and why are you in my data center? And so I go into this really technical, nerdy explanation of why I'm there. Number one reason is because if I talk too technical, I've learned that people will let me do anything because they don't want to talk about computers. Even the IT director will typically let me get away with anything if I talk over their head. And so I did this on purpose, and he leaves. And then he comes back 5 minutes later. Only this time, he comes with these really muscular, very good-looking people that don't seem like they're in IT anymore. And I'm like, I think I'm getting bounced. And so they say, sir, you're going to need to come with us. And we walk out into the hallway, and I notice that the hallways are just lined with people. The word has spread that they caught somebody in the data center. And it's important to note that this is the law firm that most major U.S. corporations call when they catch somebody in their data center for advice on how to handle it. And so, anyway, I realize, wow, I'm about to have to use my get-out-of-jail-free card or my letter of authorization. So we have this letter that says, this test is sanctioned. If you catch this person, here, call XYZ executive to verify and it makes sure that if they're, we get caught by armed guards, we don't get shot. Also, I wear a suit because I find that guards don't shoot people in suits nearly as quickly. But I joke. Though I did have one friend, he actually tests security for the United States Department of Defense. And they once got caught by guards in a missile silo that they had talked their way into. And in his one comment, which just cracked me up, he says, guard dogs just don't respect your letter of authorization. Like, yeah, I suppose they don't. So I'm like, well, I guess they're looking for a show. I should give them a show. And so I muster up my best, I call it Jersey Shore. I was just being very obnoxious and loud on my way out, talking about how it's my anniversary, and I'm probably going to get a divorce, and I had dinner arrangements, and my boss is a jerk, and now he's going to make me work late, and I just entertain them. And I talk consistently the entire time I'm being escorted out until I get on the elevator and the doors close. And I dip out on the third floor. I make sure not to go by security on my way out. But no sooner did the elevator doors close, and these lawyers look at each other, and they say, we should have detained him. Wait, this is what we do for a living. How did we let him walk out the front door, or walk out without? And they call down to security, but I wasn't going by security, so I'm already long gone at this point. And so I ended up putting in the report is that you failed to detain me. But it all happened because I kept them so entertained, so engulfed in this situation and this drama that was happening that no one stopped to think about how do I handle this situation? What should I do? And so I call that the denial of thinking attack, and it's something that can be very effective. And then there's also social media. There's a lot of malware on social media. Now, Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all these, they do a lot to try and catch malicious links and block them. But the problem is that all of this is done based on known malicious stuff. So what I mean by that is if not every bit of malware that's out there, not all of the phishing sites that are out there are known. And if they're not known, chances are your antivirus, Facebook, Google, whatever, they don't know about them. And so you can't just click on any link in social media and expect it to be safe. Stick to reputable sites. And if you ever question a link and you really, really, really want to click on it, don't forward it to your work email. But you can copy that link, and there is this website called virustotal.com. And it will run that website or that file or whatever through, 60 different antiviruses and give you the results to let you know if it thinks it's safe. So if you really, really want to click on something, that is how you do it securely. But if you even question it, it's probably malicious and you should just delete it and not even bother with that extra step. I guess I forgot to click forward there. Last thing I do want to talk about is catfishing. It's not just a dating thing. This happens all the time to steal people's identities, get information out of people. It happens as part of corporate espionage. We saw this one where there was a person that was working for this large international organization. They were hit up, they were active about environmental concerns and things like that on social media. So a competitor actually had reached out and said, did you know what your corporation's doing? They are destroying the rainforest. They're polluting the rainforest. They're doing all these horrible, evil things. And they basically court this person using this fake identity for 6 months. And then they say, hey, they finally get her to agree to run a program on one of her coworkers' computers. And so they send her this file and they say, hey, run this on your coworker's computer when no one's looking. Don't run it on your own. We don't want you to get caught. And so they do. And $5 billion worth of intellectual property was stolen. And this particular work employee, fortunately, she was very, very honest because it was about 2 weeks later, and she comes in and she sees her coworker is crying, and she's like, I don't know what happened. They said I was involved in some sort of cyber attack, and I'm being let go. And so she went to management and said, hey, listen, that was me, not her, and sort of explained the whole thing. But they lost $5 billion worth of IP because of somebody pretending to be something they're not. So when you're on social media, look for things like stock images. Like we've all seen those same models that do all the pictures that we all use in our marketing a million times. So if somebody has one of those pictures as their Facebook profile or Facebook picture, chances are they're not real. Look for accounts that are newly created. And watch for use of emotional tactics. They'll create a sense of urgency, a reason that you have to do something now. And that will help to get you to do things. So with that, does anyone have any questions? I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to worry about necessarily the rest of the slides. We're almost out. But I will say, the number one thing is just think about what might happen as a result of what you do, and be careful, because a simple act of stopping to think about what you're doing before you do it can make all the difference in the world when it comes to cyber. Any questions? Yes?
I just wanted to know what your VPN protection thing was.
I use one called IPVanish. Yes, but there's a bunch of them out there. There's some that are a lot less expensive than that one, but they're typically really, really cheap, less than $10 a month. There's one I think called NordVPN, which was just hacked, so probably don't sign up with them. But that one was like $30 a year or something for it. Don't use the free ones though, because they're free because somebody is harvesting your data. Yes? Oh. There's a very, very good chance that if one of your other coworkers has accidentally run malware on the computer, that it's going to compromise your account as well. It really depends on how things are configured. But most of the time, if the second I get onto a computer, I especially love computers that are shared by multiple people because when I compromise it, I now get everyone's passwords on the computer, not just the person that's logged in. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be actively targeting your profile, though, but it definitely means that your data is probably compromised as a result.
When your antivirus on your computer jumps up and says your antivirus needs upgrading, is that real?
That's a really difficult one because yes, your antivirus will pop up and tell you to update it, but there's also a lot of malware that is spread through fake security alerts. And so I've seen a lot of fake, you need to update your antivirus pop-ups. So you got to be really careful. Number one, know what your antivirus is. But just because you get a pop-up doesn't mean you need to click on it. You can just go to your antivirus and manually click update from there. So don't trust those pop-ups. I'm not saying that they're all malicious, because a lot of them are legit, but a lot of them are malicious too. And so in general, just don't trust it because there could be malware. In fact, one of the things I like to do when I get into a network is I will route everyone's traffic through my computer, and then I'll just inject a message at the top of every page that says, your antivirus is outdated, click here to update it. And all of a sudden, everyone starts running the malware. And so you have to be very careful with that. And I would not trust any pop-ups, regardless of what they say, but especially security pop-ups, because it's a common tactic used by cyber criminals. Anyone else? Yes?
How safe do you find like biometrics to be like on your phone with fingerprints and eye scans?
Most of them are pretty good, although I will say, when Samsung, what's their phone? Galaxy? So when Samsung Galaxy, one of their first models came out with the thumbprint authentication, all it did was store your thumbprint in plain text on the phone, and hackers were able to get that and then use that to log in. But on most modern systems with reputable vendors, it is it's much safer than like a passcode. So for example, yes, I have a passcode on my phone, but I use facial recognition to log into my phone 90% of the time because it's quicker than typing in a 13-digit passcode, and it's much more secure. But it depends on the vendor. That's where it comes back to go to reputable vendors, because if you were to get, I don't know, something from like, let's say Huawei, well, chances are it just comes with government-grade malware from China, but be careful, yes. Anyone else? All right. Yes?
That last pass thing you talked about, how do you do it? Where do you find it?
It's just in the extension. So like if you're in Chrome, for example, well, it's LastPass.com, but they have browser extensions. So you just go to your extension store, and it's just a search. It's right inside your settings. People typically figure out how to use this to install like video downloaders and other things like that, and you just type in LastPass. Otherwise, if you go to LastPass.com, it'll give you detailed instructions on how to install it. That is just one of many. I try to be vendor agnostic. That's just the one I personally use. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been enjoyable getting up to Canada. I'm from very far northern Michigan, so and now I live in the south in Alabama, and so it's nice to get back to the north once in a while where people make more sense.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. It's a little more secure.
Thank you. Okay, well, I don't know. Should I come up? All right. Thank you.